On this episode of the Carolina Sports Guy, yeah, I know I'm decked out in Panther gear, but I'm going to be covering the 1980s Duke Blue Devils, the top 10 all-time Duke Blue Devil basketball players. Before we get into today's video, folks, subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. Pound that like button, hit the bell notification to be notified of future videos, whether it be on the Carolina Panthers, Charlotte Hornets, Carolina Hurricanes, or major college sports in both North and South Carolina. And by all means, folks, comment. Give me some more ideas of things you'd like to see. I love the positive vibes I've been getting on these videos. Just keep it up, folks. All right, folks, I kind of wanted to look back, and I kind of did a video recently, and I don't know if I'm going to put that one out before this one, but I kind of did the top 12 players in Tar Heels of the 1980s. But I said, well, at this time, you know, Duke hasn't won a national championship in the 80s, but they were getting close. And this is the time in the early 80s where we're getting Mike Krzyzewski to come along, and he's going to start building that program. And remember, Duke's not going to start winning a championship until we get in the 90s and the early 2000s. And of course, the heavy recruiting they've done, and players have been one and done and going to Duke and playing for Coach K, all in the, you know, the 2010s and the 2020s now before he retires. But it's kind of started with Bill Foster in the late 70s getting Duke to the Final Four, and I've covered a video on that. If you haven't seen it, go back and check it out. And, you know, they're going to kind of spurn along before Krzyzewski can get there in the early 80s. So I said, well, you know, let me do a video. I won't do the top 12. I'll do the top 10 all-time Duke basketball players. Now, I do have two honorable mentions. The first honorable mention I'll mention here is none other than Christian Laettner. Now, believe me, if it was the 90s, Christian Laettner would no doubt, if he's not number one, he'd be number two, and I haven't even looked at that yet. But he doesn't crack the top 10 because in 88, 89, it's his freshman year. So when you look at the 80s, he's only got 1 year in the 80s, folks. And he's going to do the 90% of his damage in the 90s. So that's why he's an honorable mention. He did average 8.9 points a game his freshman year. So that in there itself is pretty impressive. The second honorable mention I'll get, and I kind of mentioned him last because he's a little bit more prominent at this time. And that's the senior year, 1979-1980, of Mike Gminski. Jim Spanarkel's moved on. We got a couple other players that played for Duke on that 77-78 team that was magical, that would be noticed in the 80s because they played half their career in the 80s. But Gminski only had 1 year, and that was 79-80. And it was probably his best year. He averaged 21.3 points a game. But based on that 1 year alone, I did not have him in the top 10. Now, if this would have been top 11, yeah, Gminski would have been number 11 on this list. But I've got him as an honorable mention. Wanted to throw it out there. But he kind of really is a product of the 70s for Duke basketball. Okay, now we get down to the top 10. Number 10, we got Alaa Abdelnaby. Now, Abdelnaby, 4 years at Duke, most significant, 87, the 88 year, and the 89. Most significant. Now, he might have got into 1990, but the main factor about Alaa Abdelnaby, he started out only averaging 4 points and then 5, and by 1989, up to 9 points. And he did have a cup of coffee, I want to say, in the NBA for Portland. Okay, and I didn't mention, but Laettner, of course, drafted by Minnesota. Gminski played a long time for New Jersey and Philadelphia and other teams, but Abdelnaby played for Portland and probably a couple other teams as well, but he is number 10 on this list. Number 9 is a guy who was on that 77-78 Duke team as a freshman and kind of was a low-key guy, but by the time the 80s rolled around, 79-80, Kenny Dennard averaged 9 points a game in 79-80, 10.6 a game in 80-81. And, Kenny Dennard was drafted by the Kansas City Kings before they moved, and he played for them for a couple of years. Number 8 on this list, another guy came in the same time as Kenny Dennard, none other than Gene Banks, who was more highly touted. And Gene Banks, of course, big freshman minutes when he played for Duke on his 77-78 Final Four team. That lost to Kentucky in the championship. Of course, 79 and 80, Gene Banks is averaging 17.3 points a game, 80-81, 18.5 points a game. Yeah, so Gene Banks could have been higher on the list, but he spent half his time in the 70s, the other half in the 80s. And that's why we got him. And Gene Banks played for the Bulls, but he was drafted by San Antonio and played the majority of his career with the Spurs. Okay, number 7 on the list, Tommy Amaker. And Tommy Amaker did not have an NBA career, but man, Tommy Amaker was, kind of reminds me of how Monty Tao was for NC State. Not as short, but you're looking at Tommy Amaker was a great floor general. Kind of like Jimmy Black was maybe for the Tar Heels during the early 80s. You're looking at a guy like Tommy Amaker. Amaker played 83-84, 84-85, 85-86, and then he finished 86-87. So a 4-year run, and in Amaker's last year, he averaged 12 points a game, but kind of stayed around the 7, 8, 9 point a game average. Was just a heck of a point guard, and he kept that team together. I mean, this is a guy that really kept Duke's talent level and had them winning. And this, like I said early on, this was a key component to Mike Krzyzewski's teams with Tommy Amaker, number 7. Number 6 is a guy y'all know very well because you see him on ESPN basketball as an analyst, and that's Jay Bilas. Now, I know y'all think, well, Jay Bilas, what kind of career did he have? Well, comes in Jay Bilas, he averaged about 9 points a game in 82-83, 8 points a game in 83-84, 10 points a game in 84-85, and he kind of fell down in 85-86 at 6.8 points a game. But he was just a solid contributor. And on the team that made the Final Four in 86 that lost to Louisville, he played a very key role just like Amaker did. NBA career, Bilas played a short stint with Dallas, but we really kind of know him as like on college basketball, how important he is as an analyst, and does a really good job of breaking down. He's very, very unbiased, and that's the thing you got to love about him as an analyst. But yeah, he was a Blue Devil, and he is number 6 on the list. And number 5 was Dave Henderson. I had to go back and look at Dave Henderson because he played 82 and 83 where he averaged 9 points a game for Duke. 83-84, he averaged almost 14 points a game. And then 84-85 averaged 11 points. But he picks it back up his senior year, 85-86, he averaged 14.2 points a game. And he was a main reason why Duke made it to the championship game in 86 where they lost to Louisville, like I said earlier. And number 4, Vince Taylor. Vince Taylor was someone, I believe he played his first year 78-79, but his sophomore year averaged 10.6 points a game for Duke and 79-80. Then he averages 14.7 points a game, 80-81. But the thing was, folks, it was hard to find anything. And I'm not sure if this is the time Krzyzewski's there. It's either the year before or the first year. But I couldn't find anything of notoriety of the 81-82 team where the Tar Heels won the national championship. But for Duke, Vince Taylor averaged 20.3 points a game in 81-82. And that was a very key contribution to be made. Very impressive. And Vince Taylor will go down as the number 4 player of the 80s for the Duke Blue Devils. And he also had a stint with the New York Knicks. Forgot to mention about Dave Henderson. He did play as well in the NBA for the Washington Bullets. Now we get down to the top 3. The number 3 guy, and I had to go back, and when I started going back looking at it, I remember him very well, was an awesome player for Krzyzewski at Duke. Great player early on. He was a stepping stone. This was a guy that really brought Duke basketball, kind of revived it, even though they had been revived in that 78 championship game with Spanarkel and Banks and Jaminski and carried on in the early 80s. This was a guy, though, that really kept it going strong, and it's Mark Allery. Mark Allery, 82-83, averaged 13 points a game. 83-84, 17.5 points a game. Kind of drops down 84-85 to 15.9 points a game. His senior year, back up to 17 points a game, 85-86. Mark Allery is a very good reason why Krzyzewski had these Blue Devils playing for that championship in 86. 4-year player, definitely was better than Bilas. Had more contributions than Amaker, although he wasn't a point guard. But Mark Allery was a hell of a big man for the Duke Blue Devils, and he is number 3 on this list. And number two on this list. Number two on this list came after the Duke 86 team. But I think the 86 team, well, actually, he played on the 86 team as a freshman. But it really kind of solidified as a background role player for that team. But had his better years, 4-year player for Duke, played, like I said, he only averaged 6 points a game in 85, 86 as a freshman. But the talent level was there. They could already see this guy was going to be better than what they had in Billis and Allery. His sophomore year, he's averaging 14 points a game for Duke. In 86, 87, he's leading the team as a sophomore in scoring. 87, 88, leads the team in scoring again, 19.1 points a game. And then his senior year, 88, 89, Danny Ferry led Duke in scoring, his third out of 4 years, leading him in scoring, 22.6 points per game. And as I'm looking down at the stats here, I believe that is the highest points per game average of any Duke player during this time period in the 80s. I'm not going to go back and look at the 70s, don't know about the 90s, but Danny Ferry, his average in the 88, 89 was the highest point per game average for any player for Duke, and he will be the number 2 player. You know, and his dad was an NBA general manager for Washington, and I remember the thing about him. He was drafted, I think, number 2 or number 3 by the Clippers, and they were a dysfunctional organization. He didn't want to play for them. His family had money. His dad had him overseas. He goes overseas and plays in Italy, I want to say. Comes back in a couple of years. Ends up playing a long career for Cleveland. Of course, I think now he's an assistant GM or been a GM in the NBA. But Danny Ferry was a hell of a player for Duke. And the number 1 all-time player in the 1980s for the Duke Blue Devils, who really was a strong point for them, playing in that 1986 championship game where they lost to Louisville, was none other than Johnny Dawkins. And I'm looking down at this, folks, Johnny Dawkins' career. I mean, he comes in as a freshman and he averaged 18.1 point a game in 82, 83 as a freshman. So this is when the likes of Krzyzewski needed him most. 19.4 points a game. He led that team in scoring again in 83, 84. Okay? Now, 84, 85, leads the team again in scoring, 18.8 points a game. So that's pretty similar to what Ferry did. Not as high an average, but did lead the team. But he did it as a freshman. And then his senior year, or this is where Ferry's a freshman, Johnny Dawkins for 4 years. So he did it for 4 years, folks. Or Ferry only did it for 3. He led the Duke Blue Devils in scoring. He averaged 20.2 points a game. And he is the main reason why the Duke Blue Devils played for that championship game in 1986 that they lost. He was the main reason. But he led the Duke Blue Devils 4 years in scoring, folks. And like I said, even though he didn't have the highest points per game average like Danny Ferry did, he led the team for 4 years, nobody else did. And he got them to that Final Four single-handedly. And he will be, no doubt, and nobody can argue, the number 1 player all time for the Duke Blue Devils of the 1980s. So, folks, what do you think of today's video? Leave me some comments, pound that like button, hit that bell notification, and be notified for future videos like these. And by all means, folks, subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. I will see you on another episode of the Carolina Sports Guy.